Hello everybody and welcome to my Survivor tier list for the Seekers of the Storm DLC. So I'm fully finished on Eclipse 8 on every single Survivor, so I figured it's now time to give my thoughts on how they play. I'm starting with the 3 DLC specific Survivors, obviously, and then we'll talk about how they relate to the rest of the cast. Starting with the Seeker, she's unlocked by default, you don't need to do anything. I'd probably put her as a solid A tier survivor. She's not quite in the S tier, especially once we get to the other survivors, you'll see why. But the Sojourn ability, her utility, is probably the best overall utility in the game. Huntress's Triple Blink is probably the best in combat, right? Because it recharges so quickly. But Sojourn just opens up so many opportunities. It's not a very long cooldown. I think it's like an 8-second cooldown, if I remember correctly. And it's basically just a volcanic egg. And that's about it. I mean, it's a very solid movement skill. Does a little bit of damage as well. But more importantly, Sojourn plus the secondary, the alternate secondary, the balls that spin around the character, those two combined make her an extremely good survivor while she's in combat as well, as just the utility purposes. So for those reasons, she has to go in A tier. It's a bit annoying to do the little Tekken combo mini game, the meditate button presses. You have to do 7 of those every single stage. So it gets quite tedious sometimes, but other than that, she's just a solid all-around survivor. Her auto attack is ranged. Her default secondary is fine. It heals you a little bit, and it's also ranged. Her alternate secondary, the balls, they are technically melee range, but given how you use them, you use Sojourn while you're doing it, and you spin in a big circle, and they deal so much damage, and they give you barrier on hit. It's such a fantastic ability. Definitely worth being in melee range for. Her utility is solid, and then her special. Her special is probably the worst part about her kit. Yeah, you get a free revive in multiplayer. It's like, cool, I guess. But having to do it 7 times per stage to get the maximum tranquility stacks is, again, very annoying. And other than that, it's just like oh shoot, I need to like quickly get some barrier while I'm, away from my enemies. You can't do it while you're in combat because you're just going to get hit. You don't get any damage reduction of any sort, or just sitting there floating in the air. So you have to really pick and choose the times where you can get away with using meditate. Other than that, though, solid survivor. Next up, Chef. This is the polar opposite of a solid survivor, at least in his current state. Trust me, I want to give him higher, but in his current state, there is, as I said in my chef guide, nothing special about his kit. There's nothing that makes you go, wow, awesome, I'm so happy I'm playing chef. Nothing. You are basically spamming cleavers 24/7. That's it. And the cleavers aren't even that potent. If you didn't know, they have a 0.5 proc coefficient, right? So they're dealing 375 damage on the return. That's the best case scenario. You're not always going to be hitting the return. And it's on a cooldown, on a charge system, and it has a 0.5 proc coefficient. And that is by far his most consistent ability. That's Chef in a nutshell, ladies and gentlemen. Seer is an ability that you almost never press. I'm not even joking. Because the combo on Chef is to use your roll, your utility skill. Well, glaze an enemy with your special, or use roll first. It doesn't matter. You can do the special glaze while you're rolling. So you can do whichever you want first. It doesn't matter. But you want to make sure the enemy is glazed from your special. You then want to roll on top of them because you can hit them multiple times while you spin in a circle. And then you want to make sure you're either spamming cleavers or using Seer. That is the only time you are using the secondary ability on Chef. Other than that, it does pitiful damage. It has terrible range, and it's a long cooldown. And for some reason, it locks you out of your other abilities for almost like 2 seconds at the end of the cast. There's like an end delay that you just cannot avoid whatsoever. So it's just all around a garbage tier ability. You're basically never pressing it. So you're basically you already have 3 abilities in your kit instead of 4. The utility ability is, I mean, it's fine, I guess. It gives you like decent movement speed and it does like decent damage, but if you're going to use it for damage purposes, remember it's also your utility, your movement skill. So you're using your movement skill to get into melee range to deal damage, but then once you're done, oops, you're still in melee range, and now you don't have a utility skill to get out of it. It's such a weird playstyle. I do not know what they were potentially trying to cook here with Chef, but it didn't really work. And then his specials, the default one, Glaze, is like okay. I think each ball does 200% damage, and I think you shoot 7 of them. The debuff it applies is Weaken. That's the same as Rex's passive, so it reduces enemy armor, damage, and movement speed, so it's like a pretty good passive, actually. But they deal such pitiful damage. They come out in a pretty wide spread. So if you're not right on top of an enemy, you're probably going to miss a couple of them, especially if they're a flying enemy. Try to hit like a greater risk with your glaze. It's probably going to miss like the majority of the shots. Just doesn't really feel that good. And then his alternate special, Yes Chef, in its current state, just do not take it. Just don't. It's so bad. 15-second cooldown instead of 10 with glaze. And you have to use the ability that it buffs before it starts the cooldown recovery. So you can't even like use Yes Chef and then hold the charged ability for a little bit, wait for like the opportune time to go in, or say you're like about to hit a combat shrine, you like use Yes Chef, hold it, and then wait for it to cool down to come up, and then hit the combat shrine, boom, you get 2 buffed abilities, right? You can't do that. You can't do that. It's such a garbage tier ability, it's not even funny. Yeah, so Chef in his current state deserves nothing higher than a D, in my opinion. And finally, the False Sun. Honestly, boom, False Sun. He's very, 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 very good. In fact, I think he's a little bit overtuned in his current state, so if you didn't know. So the main reason why this guy is in S tier is because you can just do whatever the heck you want and get good results. Like I said, he's probably a bit overtuned. He probably needs a bit of a nerfs, honestly, because his passive gives you attack speed, movement speed, flat armor, or health regen. I say or because you can't get all of them at the same time, or I guess you technically can, but the way he plays, you're just gonna have some of those stats at all times for free. Like you're just gonna get a little bit of attack speed, a little bit of armor, a little bit of flat armor, by the way, flat regen, which is extremely good, and then movement speed on top of that. Then his slam, his auto attack, like you're never just holding down the sword and swinging it, you're slamming, you're charging it up, deals 1500% damage in a decent area on like a, let's just say like a 1.5 or 2 second cooldown, right? Because there's no actual cooldown. It's just how much attack speed do you have. And it has a 3.0 proc coefficient for some reason. That's like your bread and butter skill. Now, you are in melee range while you're doing that, but remember, you get flat armor and regen from your passive, so it's not that big of a deal. Furthermore, his secondary ability, the spikes that he throws out, each one of those applies a stacking debuff that is totally refreshed upon a new stack being applied, just like bleed, that causes enemies to take 10% more damage per stack. The duration of the debuff is 5 seconds, the cooldown of the spikes, 4 seconds. So you can quite literally, on stage 1, just endlessly spam spikes and kill a target if you want, because they're just going to keep taking more and more and more damage. His dash, his utility, is probably the worst part about his kit, and it's not even that bad. It's an omnidirectional dash. I think it's like 8 second cooldown per charge. You get 2 charges by default. It's just like an okay dash. It's not nothing special. But his special, the laser, oh my gosh, it is so busted. It hits 10 times per second, cross map, infinite range, and when it's charged up, deals 175% damage per tick. And it lasts like 8 seconds or something. It's absolutely ridiculous. I literally unlocked the alternate secondary, used it once, realized it was significantly worse in every single capacity, never looked at it again. Like I said, you can just do whatever the heck you want on this guy, because in the worst case scenario, you just like use all your spikes, make sure you have the regen and the movement speed, and then you back off of combat for a little bit, bam, you're gonna be at full health, you go back in. It's just, he's incredibly good. All right, those are my thoughts on the DLC specific survivors. Now, let me go ahead and put in the other survivors in the game, just to see how they stack up, and then I'll come back to you in 1 second. All right, and here is how I would rank the rest of the survivors in the game, and this is in order inside of each tier as well. So the best survivor in the game, in my opinion, is the Railgunner. She's basically ranged loader, who was also up here in S tier with her. Ranged loader, provided you can actually hit your shots, but that is not really specific to the survivor. That's just like, how good are you at gaming? Have you played shooters before on PC? If you have, you're probably gonna be pretty good with Railgunner. You just turn your brain off, shoot enemies, and you pretty much win the run. It's very, very, very difficult to mess up on Railgunner. Then I would probably put False Sun as the second best survivor in the game. You just don't need to think. He's incredibly tanky, does amazing damage, has every tool in his kit to deal with every type of situation. Very strong survivor. Loader, maybe Loader's a bit better than False Sun. I mean, these two are pretty much equal in my opinion. Loader has insane mobility, insane damage. You just can't really like continuously stay in combat. False Sun can do that, but you have to obviously, you know, acknowledge her movement capabilities. They're absolutely fantastic. And you can also just turn your brain off. Basically, the survivors in S tier, turn your brain off, play them, you're fine. And then finally, Void Fiend, he probably requires the most thinking out of all the S tier survivors. His kit is so remarkably consistent. If you didn't know, you want to stay in your base form, not your corrupted form the majority of the time, because the kit, the auto attack is very strong, very consistent, and then you have the heal from your special. So if you take some damage, you just pop your special. It also reduces, you know, that meter to put you back in base form rather than corrupted. And you just kind of chill, and then once the teleporter boss spawns, or you're fighting a combat shrine, or a group of like tanky elites just spawned, then you let yourself corrupt, and you hold down the M1 button, and you kill them all instantly. Then coming up in A tier, Huntress, it has to be the best survivor in A tier. I was tempted to put her in S tier, but her damage is just pretty low. However, you cannot understate her ability to just constantly hit things. Now, because of her auto aim, you're not necessarily hitting things that you want to hit all the time, but you are hitting something 100% of the time. And on top of that, as I mentioned earlier in the video here, Triple Blink is the best combat related utility skill in the game. You just can dodge anything and everything that you want. It's a 2 second cooldown, absolutely crazy. It's hard to mess up a Huntress run. Again, the main thing is if you don't get enough damage, you're really gonna feel it. Next up is Seeker. As I described, her utility skill is probably the best overall in the entire game. It's just a free volcanic egg. Who doesn't like that? And with her alternate secondary, the spinny balls, it's just very powerful survivor. Acrid, you literally just poison things once. That's it. It's a very easy play style. He's not the best survivor ever, but poison is such a good passive ability. It's hard to skip on accurate here. Captain, maybe captain doesn't belong up here in A tier. Maybe captain and bandit, you can make arguments putting down here in the bulk tier here with all the rest of the survivors. But I think captain kind of stands out with this hacking beacon play style. You can, if you know what you're doing, you can really make some good use out of them. His auto attack is pretty powerful, especially let you get some attack speed and some bleed going, etc. It's kind of like a multi or a commando auto attack. You also have that high damage capability with Diablo Strike or the default secondary, doesn't matter which one. So captain's all around just a very solid survivor. His main downfall is lack of mobility. Then bandit, on the other hand, bandit has tons of mobility, tons of damage. Really, he only falters when you're fighting airborne targets, and specifically the final boss. If you choose to go, maybe he actually melts False Sun. I've only fought him once on False Sun. But for Mithrix, and especially on Eclipse, it can be kind of frustrating to fight Mithrix sometimes. He's just way too fast. You cannot get your backstabs in that frequently. But in all other situations, the vast majority of times you're in combat in a run, on bandit, he's going to feel very solid because of his passive, his guaranteed crit strike. Then moving down here into the bulk of the survivors here, these are just like, you know, your average Joes, so to speak. Starting with Engineer. Engineer just has no mobility whatsoever. Yes, his turrets do get all of his items, so you essentially get, you know, triple items overall. But the majority of the time you're going to be playing the Engineer, you're just going to be sitting running in circles, waiting for your harpoons to come off a cooldown, praying that your turrets don't die to that Elder Lemurian that's about to butt blast them. And if you don't get a Wax Quail, some energy drinks, Hopu Feather, you're just a sitting duck and you're probably going to die. Bolty, kind of the same situation. His utility skill is not the best. Yeah, it can get you out of combat, but it also stops completely when you hit an enemy, a big enemy like a Golem or a Elder Lemurian, etc. He is very tanky. He has very high base HP and armor on top of that, and if you go power mode, you know, even more tanky. But I'd say just he's average overall. Artificer has very good mobility, especially if you take her alternate special, the Ion Surge, where you can just fly in the air continuously. But she doesn't really have consistent damage. She's more of like a burst damage survivor. If you get some double bands on her, you're gonna feel the power. Otherwise, you're gonna feel kind of flaccid. Commando, he's the definition of jack of all trades, master of none. He has tools in his kit to deal with every type of situation. He just doesn't excel at any of them, and you can really feel it sometimes. Now, his primary attack is one of the best in the game. Once you get some attack speed and some bleeds and some ATGs, etc. going, you just kind of hold down the left mouse button and kill everything. But none of his damage values stick out. And other than that, you're kind of just going to pull an Engineer and run in circles and pray that you don't die to something behind you while you're like focusing on one target with your pistols. He's just nothing special to write home about. The Mercenary, I always describe this guy from a comment that I received on a video a long time ago, where it feels like when you play the Mercenary, you put your heart and soul into an essay only for the teacher to give you like a nice little check mark on the top right corner and nothing else, you know? Your APM has to be so high when you're playing this guy. You have to be focused the heck in. You make one tiny mistake, you're going to feel the consequences. Obviously, he can get good runs. He's a very fun playstyle to a lot of people. Totally understand that. However, he definitely does not deserve to be higher than he is on this list, because while you are doing a ton of things while you're playing Mercenary, they're not very effective. And then finally, Rex here. Rex is very powerful. However, the HP mechanic is a very big deal for a lot of people. If you do get used to the playstyle, I'd probably put him up here in like A tier, but for the vast majority of people, I'd say B tier Rex is probably pretty fair. And then finally, one last time here, Chef. Chef is down in, I should honestly just rename this Chef tier. There you go. There is the final survivor tier list for the Seekers of the Storm update. I appreciate you guys watching. You can check out my stream at twitch.tv/WoolieGaming and also check it out here on YouTube. I'm streaming on both nowadays. Other than that, I'll catch you in the next video. Thank you very much.